Today we have a unique opportunity to hear from our state legislators, to discuss with them exactly, things about their professional lives, why they went into politics, things about the legislative process, and then maybe some specific issue questions you want to drill them on. We'll get a chance to do as well. And so Representative Sarah Peake is here. She is in her 4th term as your state representative. She's from Provincetown. She served for a long time on the Board of Selectmen there. How many years? 5 years on the Board of Selectmen before running for the, she professionally, you say you're an innkeeper?
Innkeeper, lawyer, I don't have my license, I don't.
Yes, he is.
We need someone down to actually click Senator Wolf, he's here in the back.
Oh, good,
Senator Wolf is here.
All right.
Justice, do you want to go get Senator Wolf? All right.
Beautiful.
All right. I just talked to someone else in the main office who was going to walk them down. But
Yeah, you probably shouldn't have just done that.
What's that?
That was a bad idea.
Oh, I sent the wrong person. Do you need to? Should you
want to
help
send
him, Cooper?
I should probably supervise him at most points.
Okay.
He's already jogging. I don't know.
Okay. Anyway. And so thank you to Representative Peake for being here, and thank you to Mr. Galvin, member of the press, Cape Cod Chronicle reporter, for coming and covering this today. So I'll let you just give a little bit of background. That'll probably give us time, and then we'll have Senator Wolf with us probably at that point. So.
Like what kind of background?
Let's see. Oh, should we start with the first question? Because that way we'll start with the background question. Marley.
For
What made you want to go into
extra credit.
Oh yeah. What made you want to go into politics?
It's a very good question. You know, the class that was in here before was a psychology class. They should have asked me that question. No, I'm only joking. I sort of backed into it, I guess. Throughout high school, I was involved in student council. There was like an athletic leaders club. I was president of that. Seemed to be drawn to different organizations with a mission the overarching mission to try to make things better. And then after graduating from college, I got busy going to law school and starting up a career and sort of took a step back from that. And also at that time, I was living in a part of New York State called Westchester County, just a little north of New York City. And just about everybody who was involved in government there was a Republican, and I'm a Democrat, so there wasn't much opportunity for me, even on a volunteer basis, to do something like be on the planning board or the zoning board, because you just didn't get appointed if you were a member of the wrong party. But then coming and moving to Provincetown full-time, which is now, 21 years ago, we're starting our 21st season. I have a bed and breakfast, my wife and I do, and it's our 21st year of opening our doors to folks and having them come join us. I began to get involved in the business community there through the Chamber of Commerce, the Provincetown Business Guild. I was appointed as a community at-large member to the first high school site council after ed reform in 1993. And from there, I ran for the Charter Commission, because that seemed like a good thing to do as a lawyer. You got to review the technicalities of the town charter and make suggestions about that. And then from there, I ran for the Board of Selectmen. Much like Mr. Dixon, I got there and said, wow, I really love this. Maybe I'm kind of good at it, and I've gotten some good things done locally. What's the next step? And then state level. So it was a progression kind of all the way through. And it always helps to have a parent whisper in your ear, as my mother did, oh, I think you'd really be an excellent elected official. I don't think she called it elected official, but somebody. Interestingly, in the town I grew up in, when I was a senior in high school, we elected our first female mayor of our little village. And she made a point of having me meet that woman who was the mayor, duly elected, in order to understand what she did. It was a part-time volunteer mayor's job at that time. But that too, I think little parental guidance of push, push, push helps along the way too. A little bit of pushing. Really, I saw it more as supportive. Here's my buddy,
So,
Dan Wolf.
Senator Wolf, we can answer the same question. All right. So
I pushed the button that said intercom, and then I waited, and they said, when did you put the locks on this door? And they said, right before the February vacation.
Oh,
So have you been here for a while?
Yeah.
I've taught 3 classes.
Yeah.
And
Are
we've
you
gone
burnt
on a
out?
site, no, I've been here maybe 10 minutes. And we just started, like
We just
literally a minute
started.
ago.
So that was the first question, and Marla, you could repeat the question for Senator Wolf.
What made you want to go into politics?
How many hours do we have?
Yeah. And Dan's a little different because I sort of went from the school site council to charter to selectmen to running for rep, and Dan kind of comes out of a private business practice, and now he's the state senator. So none of this fooling around for him. He got his eye on the ball, and there he
Well,
is.
we're actually, I think, a great complement in public service, because I think the best thing we could have in public service is a good balance of people who come from different walks of life. So Sarah, as an attorney, as a small business person, and somebody who's always been involved in public service, as you just said, came up one way, and my avenue was very different. So I'm going to talk about the personal, the passion for it. I grew up in the 60s. Sarah and I actually are within 2 months of the same age.
Yeah.
So
just
anything
about,
I
right.
say about when I grew up, you're going to say, no, dude, that's not really what happened when
Yeah.
we grew up. But I grew up in the city of Philadelphia, in the city. And so in the 60s and 70s, I graduated from high school in 1975. There was a lot of the urban problems that were going on back then. There was a lot of racial tension. Education was a big issue there. Civil rights was a big issue. Women's rights was a big issue in the early, in the 60s and 70s. So
And in 2013.
now, do you guys? Yeah, and
The
again,
same,
and
the
still
same
and
issues
again,
are being
one of the same
cycled
issues.
through again. It's,
Do you guys
shocking.
study the 60s in here?
They're not actually specifically. No.
How many of you have actually, like in textbooks or something, read about the 1960s or had discussions? I find it makes me feel so old when I think that the era I grew up in is now in textbooks and you're studying it as part of your history. But I will say that I then moved to Cape Cod. I learned how to fly airplanes. I went to college for study political science, but learned to fly airplanes at the Chatham Airport. How many folks here have been to the Chatham Airport? So in 1977, which means I've now been flying more than 35 years, I went back to trade school for 2 years and became an aircraft mechanic, and then started Cape Air. When were these folks born? You guys were born in like 90 what?
95.
So I started Cape Air in 1988, before most of you were born, and have been.
Don't say that. It makes us sound old. Don't say it
It's
that way.
horrible. My youngest daughter actually just finished her sophomore year at NYU. She's on track today, and yeah, it'll be nice to have her back on the Cape. But time does pass. Build a company. We started Cape Air in 1988. Cape Air is now 26 years old. We employ about 1,000 people, and it's been a very successful company. We serve 37 destinations around the world, and I've been very proud to be part of that team. But I have sort of a nagging connection to some of the issues that Sarah and I, as we grew up, were looking at. The civil rights stuff, the women's issues, Vietnam War was going on, a lot of stuff about economic justice, how was the middle class in this country doing? And then I sort of put my head down, built a company, raised 3 daughters, all of whom were raised in Harwich, and then looked up a few years ago and said, wow, this is not what I thought the world was going to be like. If somebody had said back in 1975 when I got out of high school, where do you think things are going to be like in 2010 or 2013? I would have said, well, we'll be providing opportunity and educating everybody. We will have tackled all these women's rights issues. I mean, just one of them, when I was coming of age, the average women's pay was 69 cents on a dollar. Now it's 77 cents. And I think, Sarah, when we were dealing with that issue back in the mid-1970s and said, wow, in 30 years, we're only going to make 8 cents worth of progress on that issue, we would have said, no way. I mean, this is on the right track and we're going to get there. A lot of the civil rights issues still exist. Probably the most economically challenged group in this country are still urban minorities, where the unemployment rate in a lot of cities is in excess of 25%. And that very often has an impact on minorities. So I sort of woke up a few years ago and said, wow, this is not the world that I thought we were going to be evolving towards when I was coming of age. And really decided that with the success I've been blessed to have, and the fact that my youngest daughter was actually moving out of the house, so my wife and I were going to be, what's the term, empty nesters, that it really was an opportunity for me to get back involved in some of the issues that I cared so much about as I was being raised, and try to make a difference in the world for my kids' generation, for your generation, And so that the legacy that we leave when we actually do get to the point of retiring is one that we can truly be proud of. One where the American dream, as realized by a good education for everybody and the opportunity to be successful, like Sarah and I have been, is an opportunity that's available for everybody. Where we have a better balance in our economy between corporations and between middle-class people who are out earning wages. I'm just going to give you a couple examples, things that really concern me. And I'm just going to take a couple examples from our economy now. Let's take a look at food. And as a politician, government is responsible to make sure that the corporations that produce food that we all eat, what's in the supermarket, what's in the fast food stores, is something that will make us healthy generally. Not just make food companies profitable, but make us healthy. And if you look at that now, it's out of balance, because if you look at what's in our food production chain, has anybody read any of the books? Do you guys study nutrition here at all? And look, for example, at meat production, where now in our meat chain we're introducing hormones, we're introducing antibiotics. That's having health outcomes here. The introduction of corn syrup into all of our foods that make us food addicts and are having huge health implications for the entire population. So I get concerned when I see corporate profits and the ability of corporations to put stuff out there that all of us need, food being one of them. But the healthy outcome isn't there to the degree that we'd want it to. So I think we're out of balance. I think if you look at food production, it's an issue. I think if you look at energy production, Sarah and I have been joined at the hip on talking about the 40-year-old nuclear power plant up the road there. Well, why do we have a power plant in our backyard that's 40 years old, that's relying on nuclear energy and 40-year-old technology to produce our energy? And again, that's the profit and the power of that corporation that is having implications in our own backyard relative to the risk that we're taking. Energy production, if you were looking during the blizzard on February 8th, of the 160,000 power customers on Cape Cod, 100,000 of them lost power in that blizzard. Many of them lost power for days and days on end. We should be investing in our infrastructure and fixing the electric grid. So why are our energy companies not doing what we need? And again, we deregulated, how many years ago did we deregulate the
It's
energy?
before you or I were up there, so
Yeah.
it's not our fault.
But the politicians gave away the energy industry to for-profit, investor-owned
15 years ago or so, I think.
15 years ago, without enough guarantees that we were going to rebuild the energy infrastructure, rebuild the grid, and do it in ways that are sustainable and safe for all of our citizens. So if you look at any part of our economy right now, you're looking at corporations that I think have a lot of power to influence the way they do business, but the outcomes of those corporations are not always in the best interest of the citizens. The role of government, from my perspective, is to provide a balance between healthy companies that provide great jobs for everybody, but also that provide good outcomes for us, as defined by all that stuff. So it has to do with, and I'm going to close now for more questions, but it has to do with...
This was just the introductory question.
I get it.
You know?
I get it. The wish of the newspaper when they did their New Year's resolutions
Yeah.
was that Dan Wolf could answer a question in less than 20 minutes. And I'm proving that the answer to that is no. But there's 5 quick things. The government legislates, the government regulates, the government taxes to raise revenue, the government provides infrastructure so that we all can have successful businesses and successful lives, and the government provides long-term vision. Where do we want to be in 20, 30, or 40 years? So the reason I got into government was to look at all of those different characteristics of why we're here. So that's the question of why I got into government. Ultimately, to make the world a better place and to work with great partners like Sarah to get there, and you all.
Thank you.
Bravo.
Now, I actually had thrown a lot of these out and I was going to come, but I'll let you guys jump in. If no one has a question, I'll spur one of you. But everyone wanted you to jump in with their question.
Is there a question on that?
Yeah, you mentioned with the energy on Cape Cod. How do you feel about installing wind farms and Indian Sound?
I think it's going to happen, and it's a federal project, something that Dan and I have not had and never will have the opportunity to weigh in on. About 7 years ago, the governor and the Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs had to sign off on a permit. So given that it looks like all the permitting's going along, I hope that it provides us enough energy out there. It gives us one more energy source sort of in our overall toolbox. So when we take Pilgrim offline, which is my ultimate goal, our ultimate goal, we have an an additional power source. But I want to make sure that we on the Cape aren't left out in the cold. And what disturbs me about it is it's interfering with our fishing grounds. We don't know what the turbidity in the water is going to do with juvenile fish and shellfish larvae out there, how long that disturbance will happen. There are people, I don't happen to mind the way they look, but there are people who say the viewscape is ruined by this. Yet, the whole project is going to be staged out of New Bedford. The jobs are concentrated out of New Bedford. We have underemployed men and women who have made their living working on the water, whether it's as ferryboat captains, mostly fishermen, who would love to be able to have jobs even as, captaining the boats that bring equipment out and things like that. I've spoken to several fishermen I know from Chatham and Harwich who have applied for those jobs. They haven't even gotten an answer back to their resume. So when I hear things like that, to use the vernacular, it really frosts me. And it seems like we're being asked to bear all of the risk without any of the ancillary local benefits that accrue from it in terms of jobs and economic opportunity. And even if the Cape Wind folks had said, well, I tell you what, we're going to give you a nickel off per kilowatt hour when the thing goes live, so all of us can see a dip or maybe a steadying off on our electric bill, that might have helped also, made people a little more cooperative. But for me, the lesson from the wind farms is not so much about renewable energy and whether this is the new or right technology, but you talk about the role of government. This is a lesson in government about what a process should not be. This was make it up as you go along. Let's find some little donut hole in the middle of Nantucket Sound that's in this sort of limbo land between state waters and federal waters, and we'll plant it there so there's great confusion over who regulates it. Department of Energy said, well, it's really not ours. Department of the Interior said, well, maybe it's ours to regulate. Every time somebody issued a permit, they'd say, oh no, somebody else needs to issue a permit. And it literally was make it up as you go along. And I'm a big believer that even if a process is cumbersome, if it's open and transparent and everybody knows what the steps are. I mean, something as simple as I'm replacing the brick steps in front of my house. So I went down to the building department in Provincetown and said, all right, so my house is in the historic district. What do I need to do? Well, you need to fill out this application. You don't have to come to the historic district meeting. As long as you're doing the exact replacement at the next meeting, they can sign off on it. But there's a sheet of paper that told me, I don't need a variance because it's not going into closer to the setback than the old ones were. But I knew how to replace my steps. For the wind farm, nobody knew, and we made it up. It took years, it cost millions, and the conversation became about the regulation of it as opposed to what could some of the economic benefits be, what's the technology, what are the true environmental impacts, and all of those things. So on the state level, I'm very proud to have been one of the co-sponsors and taken the lead on the House side in our Oceans Act, which in effect, the Speaker doesn't like to call this, but what it really is, in effect, it's like zoning for the sea for state waters, so that there's a plan in place, and you know where you can go and mine for, let's say you want to do beach nourishment, you can bring up sand and gravel and transfer it over to some other place. So you know certain areas are out of bounds that are just reserved for fishing areas because the habitat is so critical. Or we also have designated areas in state waters where wind turbines will be permitted, and we've laid out what the process is.
Let me do a quick poll. How many people here support the wind farm? How many people here are opposed to the wind farm? Raise your hands high. And how many have no opinion on the wind farm?
I really don't know.
Okay, it's interesting because the majority here are on the fence. I completely agree with what Sarah said, and I would just say to me, it's a failure of those 5 things I said about government: regulate, legislate, provide infrastructure, tax and revenue, and long-term vision. If you take any one of those 5, it's a failure. The first thing we should have is a long-term vision for an energy policy. It should be sustainable. It should be a transparent, open process. How we get there, we should define the 20-year goal, and then we should assign projects. We should engage the private sector in building that infrastructure. Those are the jobs. What we did instead is 15 years ago, we deregulated the industry. We said, you know what, when it's profitable to build something, someone will build it. Basically, that's what we said. When the electric price is high enough to make it profitable to do something, someone will do it. And so you can't fault the developer, because what they did is they found an open piece of property that, hey, as Sarah said, it's a donut hole. They said, we can make a bundle of money doing this for the investors. We're going to put a project there. We're going to sell our electricity into the grid. So that's a failure of government, to say, how much renewable energy do we want by 2020? Where do we want it to come from? Wind, solar, tidal, and then to actually have a plan to get there. So that what Cape Wind is a symptom of government not doing its job. And again, this was long before Sarah was in the legislature, long before I was in the legislature. But I very much favor building towards a long-term vision of sustainable energy, not only in production, but in distribution also. With the cornerstone of energy, any energy policy being what? What are the two cornerstones of good energy policy? Somebody throw out two things. That's one, yes? Clean, that's good. Yes, and efficiency and conservation they go hand in hand. So affordable is important too, but I always say don't talk to me about renewable unless you first talk to me about conservation and efficiency. Because the two best things we can do relative to providing energy is to limit the use and minimize the use, so that we need to produce less of it for the minimal amount. So we have some good stuff for conservation and efficiency.
They've got the right people over here.
Yep. But we're not 100% of the way there yet.
All right, now, Representative Peake has to leave a little early because she has a commitment in Chatham at 2. So we'll do time to answer maybe one more question. So one more question, Representative Peake will answer, and then we'll let her go. And then we'll have Senator Wolf until 2 o'clock. So, Hannah.
Why are you for shutting down the power plant?
Because as Dan said, it is 40-year-old technology that is surrounding a nuclear reaction. And fundamentally, I don't want to be an alarmist, but fundamentally, I don't think it's safe. We went with a delegation of legislators on a tour of the plant, which I think was supposed to make us feel better about the operation of it. I came away from there feeling like I had just finished touring the set of the science fiction movie that had been produced in the 1950s. I mean, although the equipment's 1970s, but an early sort of black and white science fiction movie is what the technology looks like there. So I worry about that. They have changed the standards for what they deem to be safety since it was built and went online in the 1970s. So in other words, if we use the standards that they had then for what was safe and allowed to continue to operate, the plant would not be operating. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission has moved the goal line, and they keep moving it, and they keep moving it. An example of that, we asked a question when we were there about the brittleness of, it's not the inner container, but there's a container within which the nuclear reaction occurs that generates heat, that then heats water. That water turns turbines, that turns into electricity, and out it goes over the power lines. But to keep all of that heat from getting too hot, there is seawater that is brought into the plant, is circulated around it, and then off it goes. But inside of that, is it a cement container?
It's
I think
cement, steel reinforced cement.
Steel reinforced cement container. So there is an issue as it gets bombarded by these neutrons and everything of brittleness with it. But they built into it these things that they call cards that they can go in and they can pull out and they can test for the brittleness of the containment vessel. So somebody, not me, but somebody asked the question, oh, so what's the tolerance on that brittleness? Oh, we just pulled the card out last month, as a matter of fact. And if the standard is like this, we are at the low end, not even close to what is dangerous in terms of brittleness. So okay. So I go home a week later, pick up the Boston Globe, running an article explaining how nuclear energy works and all of this kind of thing. Part of what was in the article was talking about the standard for brittleness when those cards were put in for us to test was over here, and now we've moved it over to here. So using 1974 standards, that containment vessel is too brittle. this tells me two things. One is it's a dangerous thing to move goalposts like that. Second thing is it cast into doubt everything that they said to me that day. Because the honest answer from the operator, that's my reminder, so hit the road here. It's my Puerto Rican coquille. The honest answer would have been, well, we're within the tolerance. You may learn that when the plant opened, we had a different understanding of what the tolerance is. But since that time, they could pick something up. We've learned that the cement is actually stronger than it really is, or whatever. No, there wasn't any of that. It's like, yes, we're well within the range. You know, ignore that man behind the curtain, to quote from The Wizard of Oz. There is no problem here, and you know, lo and behold, they weren't exactly being fully open and forthright. And there's a big environmental impact also. One of which is, as Dan says, that plant is now a nuclear waste storage site. When we went online 40 years ago with all of these plants, the idea was we were somehow going to safely ship, maybe by rail or truck, these spent fuel rods. Once they cooled enough, we're going to ship them to Yucca Mountain, there's at the bottom, and bury them miles below the earth.
It's Nevada.
I think it's Nevada, yeah. Bury them miles below the earth where they could continue to cool and have their reaction for the next trillion years or whatever. Well, people in Nevada said, oh, we don't want to become the nuclear waste dump for the entire nation. So that never happened. So what they have done instead is in the cooling pool, you may remember from Fukushima, one of the areas that got overheated and when the fires started, is they take these spent fuel rods that are too spent to efficiently create enough energy, enough heat anymore to generate electricity from, they are still very, very hot. So they've got to keep them in these water baths. So we originally designed 800 fuel rods. We're at 2,800 now?
32?
3,200. And at, we've got room for maybe another 400 or 800 after that. So they are packing these in, you know, again, 40 years ago the standard was they'd say they've got to be spaced like this. Well, then it got fuller. Well, now they have to be spaced like this. Well, now they're spaced like this. So there's that, and now they're building what's called dry cask storage to be able to take the oldest of those rods out of the pool and store them on site in these big cement, literally like cement casks, instead of taking them out to Yucca Mountain. Now those cement casks, they are on the grounds of where the plant is. We went and looked over the seawall, and the tide was out, but it's maybe a 10 or 12 foot drop. So you think about like what happened at North Beach, and how Monomoy broke through, at the back beach going all the way up to Provincetown, with the rising sea level, these big storms, the waves have just eroded away at that. So I think for the long term, as you look into climate change, there's these risks also. And then I could go on and on about how many fish are killed. You know, if you guys go down to Bell's Neck and you see the herring running there, you're not allowed to take a net and catch one fish. During the time when river herring are running, they get sucked into that river that goes and runs around and cools, and they're killing like 1,500 river herring a day there. So, bad news all around. And we don't need the power. Like the plant has been offline. I think it just recently went back online. It goes offline when it's refueled, and then, quite honestly, it's gone offline a couple of times because of operator error. Things get a little too hot. Automatic shutdown process starts, which thankfully has worked. So the plant shuts down. You don't see your lights go off. They stay on. So it's more of a redundant source. There's other places we can power.
One of the things I'd like to impart upon all of you is
First,
kind of,
sorry, we got to thank Representative Peake and let her go because your goal was to leave 4 minutes ago. So, thank you.
Yeah, all right. See you soon. Have a good weekend. All right, good.
A lot of issues. The other thing I would say to you guys is the whole concept of generational responsibility, that I don't feel good about leaving you all when you're 40 years old or 38 or 39 years old, what will then be a 60-year-old nuclear waste dump. Let's assume it's not producing electricity anymore with 5,000 spent fuel rods there. And for us to say, well, we're retired now, you guys deal with it. I mean, part of the responsibility that you have to future generations is actually to leave things in better shape So it's a failure on, that is also a failure of government in many different ways. But it's also just not the right thing to do generationally. We should be fixing problems and handing you a better world, not kicking the can down the road and saying, you fix it. I'm an aircraft technician. As I said, I spent 2 years at school. When I went through that plant with Sarah, the first thing they do is they put like Geiger counters on you to record how much radioactivity you're getting, which doesn't give you a great feeling. It's like, well, you're running a good ship here, but just in case, we're going to put a Geiger counter on you. We're going up and down these elevators, and I'm looking at Sarah, and her Geiger counter like clicks to 1. And I look at the guy, and I'm like, is that a bad thing? He's like, well, we don't worry until it gets to 3. I'm like, dude, I hate to tell you, I'm starting to worry, right? And then the best part, because this will give you an idea how rinky-dink it is, right? You take the elevator up to the top floor, to where the cooling pool is, and the top of the reactor vessel is, and you get out, and you like step off the elevator, and it's like, looks like pieces of flypaper. So I look at the guy, and I'm like, what is that? What are those mats there for? And you know what the answer is? It's to collect any radioactivity material that might have gotten on the bottom of your shoes. So they literally have you walk on flypaper to physically pull the radioactivity off of your shoes. I gotta tell you, if that's the technology that we're guaranteeing safety, that's like literally crazy. So I mean, I could go on all day about Pilgrim. I think it's a failure economically, it's a failure of social policy, it's a failure of energy policy. It's a great example of us putting the profit of the investors in that plant who live in New Orleans, Louisiana. What we're doing is we're providing for their financial risk by introducing to us a safety risk that we don't need. The other thing is, have you been there?
I have not been.
It's like going to Fort Knox. I mean, they have level after level of security, anti-terrorism, people walking around with submachine guns. And that's to boil water. I mean, you look at this and you say, there's gotta be like a less crazy way to boil water. I mean, if you gotta protect it like this. So it's just, that plant shouldn't be there.
Next question before I give someone on there.
Okay, well, do rapid fire, and I'll hold me to less than 30 seconds. I gotta practice this. Yeah.
Don't you think, I mean, just going back to the wind farms, don't you think we should like start cleaning up the environment instead of adding more to it?
Yes, and so people would, if you lived where they're doing mountaintop removal to get coal in West Virginia, and you're tearing literally the environment apart, and then you're burning coal, which is the dirtiest form to make electricity, what you would say is building those wind farms are cleaning up the environment. It's just they're not cleaning up the environment in our backyard. So I look at this as sort of an environmental justice issue. For years, we've had electricity here on the back of somebody else, either where they're pulling the oil out of the ground, where they're extracting the natural gas, or where they're getting the coal. So it is sort of a NIMBY argument to say, gee, it's our environment, it's in our environment, we don't like it, so we shouldn't do it, when we know that there are environmental impacts wherever we're creating and extracting energy out of the earth. So the answer is yes, I think we need to be mindful of the environment, but I think that we are being mindful of the environment by doing renewables.
Let me just clarify, if I think I can summarize your two responses. You support wind energy, you may even support, or conceivably you would support, or you support this going forward, but the process how we got here has been a failure.
Yeah,
Is that a fair?
I think it's also fair to say that a bad process leads to an outcome that is not predictably a good outcome. So I'm not sure whether we know that Cape Wind is a good outcome because the process was so broken.
Yeah.
So I don't inherently have a problem with having a wind farm out there. You could call that tepid support of having a wind farm out there. But it's hard to be in favor of it strongly if it's not part of a big energy plan. If we're just going to solve energy by putting wind farms here and there and solar projects here and there, wouldn't it be neat to have goals like the Commonwealth does now? This governor has some pretty good energy. He has a good energy plan. But this happened before Deval Patrick was governor, and the outcome might have been a little different.
Do you support medical marijuana dispensaries on Peake?
God, how do I say this delicately? I certainly support those who are in need. I have a daughter who has a condition that there are times at which she might want to do that. I don't think she has, but there are times that she might want to. So there are some diseases, Crohn's disease, other chronic diseases, types of arthritis, where it has been demonstrated that marijuana is a good medicine to use. So yes, I support the access to it. Now, the exact mechanism we're doing that we voted for in that referendum, I think it needs to be cleaned up. So the answer is yes, I support access to it. Do I support the dispensaries and the way we're going forward? Not necessarily. And again, I think it's going to satisfy certain business interests. People are going to make a lot of money on this thing. But whether or not it's best for our public health, I think is questionable. I think there are other states that are ahead of us where there have been some issues. I think we have to be very careful about how we do it. That sounds like a political answer, right?
Yeah.
Next question.
Are there any issues that you can give us an example of?
For,
Medical marijuana that
I mean,
went
where,
bad?
where it would be bad?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that potentially what you're going to see is people making a ton of money. And in California, there are a lot of people who are getting access to marijuana through that vehicle that it was not intended for. So
So are you saying like illegal distribution?
yeah, I mean, it has certainly led to illegal distribution. The other side of the coin, you didn't ask me about regular, recreational marijuana. And I think that's a discussion that we need to have, is whether all of the enforcement that's going into preventing the use of marijuana recreationally is actually successfully doing what we want it to do, that enforcement. Is marijuana a gateway drug? I mean, there are some people who say it is a serious gateway drug. There are some people who say it isn't. We need to go a long way towards how we manage the drug issue in this country, because it's a failure.
Are you saying it's bad that people are making money off of marijuana?
Illegally.
Illegally.
He's saying that people with medical cards go get it and then sell it to friends.
If you look at what's gone in California, which was the first state to really have dispensaries and do it, there are a lot of people who say that those who have access to marijuana through that avenue are taking advantage of a system which doesn't really do what it's supposed to do.
But
But
it's,
aren't they trying to put a cap on like the amount that you prescribe?
Yes, yeah, there are regulations in the way we're going to do it here, which should make it a little bit better. But I think part of the question you're asking is, what about how we're doing drug enforcement, and what about the use of marijuana in general? It does not occur to me. I say this to a high school group. You know better than I do, because it doesn't happen in the social circles that I go in. But I have never seen it as a problem to get your hands on marijuana. Does anyone want to argue with me?
No.
So is this a solution in search of a problem? If one of you had a disease, or if your parent had a disease and you know that marijuana would help with that disease, do you think your parent would have trouble getting marijuana? All right. I'm asking you questions, I'm not answering them. So that being the case, that there's a lot of marijuana out there that people in medical need can already get, what we're doing is we're regulating in a way to create a business that's going to allow some people to make a lot of money. We're solving a problem. Again, it's a solution in search of a problem. I have not had a lot of people come to my office while I've been in office saying, I have a chronic medical issue for which I cannot get medical marijuana. Yes.
What would you like to see the outcome be with marijuana?
In general,
Yeah.
I would like us to have a really open and full dialogue about whether the cost-benefit analysis of decriminalizing, legalizing the recreational use of marijuana might actually solve more problems than it's creating. I think we aggressively have to do drug education. I think we have to do prevention. I think we have to understand the relationship between gateway drugs and getting into serious substance abuse. I don't think we understand it that well, and I think we need to adequately fund prevention and treatment programs. But it's very clear that trying to make marijuana illegal so that people don't use it is a failed policy. I don't think anybody could say that it isn't a failed policy. And what you have is politicians not willing to say, hey, I'm in favor of taking a look at actually changing the way we think about drugs, investing more in prevention and treatment, instead of trying to stop it from being available. The real problem on Cape Cod right now is prescription drugs gone crazy, oxycodons, oxycontins, and then heroin, because that's what those drugs lead to, because heroin's a lot cheaper. And I never thought I would live in a world where heroin is a drug of choice, because it's a lot cheaper than the gateway drugs, which are prescription drugs. And I'll tell you, that's what I'd like to go after. I'd like to go after the pharmaceutical companies that are creating all these drugs that are highly addictive, that have been demonstrated to be gateway drugs, that are really serious narcotics. And there are a lot of people right now making money off of them, and they're the investors in pharmaceutical companies.
So
Why isn't our government holding them
why don't-
accountable?
Yeah, why don't they worry about illegal distribution of that?
They are worrying about it. The question is,
Why?
how much lobbying money is going into the pharmaceuticals? I know a friend of mine had a knee replacement a month ago. She got 100 oxycodone pills when she left the hospital. That's crazy. Because we know that 90% of those pills are going to end up either sitting in her medicine cabinet being flushed down the toilet, or worst case, getting out into circulation and being sold illegally and creating real problems. And those are the problems that are out there now. And by the way, the chances are somebody in this room either has had a problem or is having a problem with that. That's how rampant it is. And if you are, get help, because it doesn't get any better.
We had about 4 topics we were going to get into. We've covered 2 of them pretty well, which is a sort of background about why Representative Peake and Senator Wolf went in, and you guys have certainly hit some of the issues. The one I'm going to, I think, have to skip over, which is the legislative process. We were because that I don't think we can hit in 5 minutes. But the other one I wanted to talk to, actually, Emma, you had a question I thought we might glue the web. If you remember which one it is.
Yeah,
Like your
said-
second question.
Yeah, you said.
Oh, I did circle one? Yes. Read your question. Hopefully I remembered that right.
This sounds like a setup.
Well, it's not a bad one.
What opportunities in politics do you think there are for high schoolers?
Oh my God.
Isn't that a nice setup?
It is a great
Yeah.
setup. So before I give you my way too long-winded answer, you guys give me some answers.
Student government.
Now, what does network mean?
You contact people in the field and make sure you show them. Like if you're putting more and make your face, name
To express yourself, really.
Yeah.
What else? What have you done to get involved in politics? How have you expressed an issue, depending on an issue, or tried to do something to affect the political process? Yeah, help run a debate.
And meet a gallery.
There you go. Go to a rally in Washington. Poll. Yeah, work the polls. Go stand. We did some exit polling, but you could also go work for candidate, hold signs at the polls.
Lobby in the state house.
Lobby at the State House. Justify.
Door knocking. I mean, you're Mr. Dixon or John. How do you guys? What do you guys call it?
Mr. Dixon.
Keep it clean.
They
They call me. A great example of civic involvement, right? It's a guy who has a great life. He's got a great job, but he said, I need to try to make my universe a better place. And he steps up and runs for office. And I supported John. I'm very proud to have done that. So encourage people who are thinking of running. Think about running yourself for office. Look at candidates. Say, do they have a vision? Are they inspirational? Do they understand the issues? And then support them, either financially or with your time. It's really, really important to get involved politically. Politics is what I call the civic expression of our collective will. Think about that. That's a mouthful. The civic expression of our collective will. If you're not willing to include your collective will, it gets left out. So you've got to have an opinion, have an idea, have a perspective, have your own vision, and then try to put that into the mix and be part of the process. So really, it is an exciting place to be, and it's I feel blessed to represent what I consider to be the best state Senate district in the country.
All right, we have about 1 minute left. Any parting thoughts?
No, my parting thoughts are get involved, stay involved, without regard to your belief system or your politics. As you know, I'm a Democrat, but I think balance is important. So the best outcomes are all ideas at the table, not just one perspective. So regardless of your perspective, have your voice held. And also, John, I believe in the conversations amongst each other. Those issues about drugs and wind farms and power plants. Talk to each other about it, because that social evolution is really what drives the political process.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Senator. And
misread the clock by 1 minute, so let me just say, not, we got one last question, 30-second question? But anyway, I want to thank the Senator Representative for coming and spending the time. You guys in class, we've been talking about the state legislative process. And so what I want you to then think about is, now that you've met your representatives, think about that process, think about issues that you think may be involved in that process, or you're wanting to see go through that process, and write them an email. I'll put their emails on the board for you on Monday. Send them an email about why they should do X, Y, or Z. Well, yeah, how about that for an extra credit assignment? Yeah. All right. We'll work on it. All right, thank you guys.